Hi, everybody. We'll start now, since we don't want to keep you too late. My name is Darlene Pearson, and I'm with the Centretown Community Association. I'm happy to welcome you to our panel discussion tonight on climate resiliency. Bienvenue tout le monde et je vous invite à rester avec nous ce soir pour notre table ronde sur la résilience climatique. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging that we are on the unceded and unsurrendered, unconquered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We are grateful for the opportunity, and we thank all generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of and continue to take care of this land. We have 4 panelists with us this evening, and one substitution. Martha Robinson is joining us from the Ottawa Public Health group. Dr. Andy Kenney, Professor Emeritus from the University of Toronto Faculty of Forestry. Mary Stewart, landscape designer with Living Green Landscaping. And Toon Dreessen, a well-known Ottawa architect. Each will touch on different aspects of the climate resilience topic that we're all about this evening. I'm just going to run through a few logistics before we start. We'll be recording this event so that we can capture all the valuable information that will be shared this evening. And those recordings will be available on the websites of both the Glebe and Centretown Community Associations. Our panelists will be available after the presentations to answer your questions. And I'm going to ask if you could put QQQ before your question, because that helps distinguish it from any other comments that are in the chat session. We'll also be doing a short survey, so I'll ask your indulgence to take 3 seconds or so just to complete the survey so that we know what community association or what part of the city you're coming in from. Notre événement ce soir se déroule en anglais. Cependant, je vous invite à poser vos questions en français dans le chat. Tout à l'heure, j'ai mentionné que ce serait préférable de mettre QQQ avant la question pour les distinguer des commentaires sur le chat. Si le temps permet, on va y répondre. Sinon, une réponse en français sera affichée sur les sites web de Glebe et de Centretown. I would now like to introduce Joan Freeman, who will introduce both the topic and frame the topic for this evening's event. Please go ahead, Joan.
Thank you, Darlene. I'm going to get some pictures loaded up, I hope, Laura. If you can put them up. I'll just go ahead while Laura's doing that. So my name is Joan Freeman. I'm from the Glebe Community Association. This panel discussion was sparked by a conversation that Darlene and I had over a year ago while doing one of our many COVID walks around the neighborhood. Like most people, we're worried about climate impacts. So the purpose of this panel discussion is to start a conversation in our communities about what we can do to climate-proof our homes and communities. We want you to know that the situation isn't hopeless. There are actions we start soon will make a huge difference, and taking action will also make us feel better. So tonight, there's a lot of different ways we could slice and dice this. So tonight, we're going to start small. We're focusing on urgent, high-risk impacts on heat, one topic, and on the practical things that you can do. There are many solutions for heat. Many solutions for heat also help manage water, and some even help save energy. So there will be some talk of that too. I've got 3 simple messages to start our discussion. The first one is that heat is an urgent and big risk. And you'll see tonight with all the snow, we may not be so upset about this, but in the next, Laura, can you go back, please? Just leave it there. We're moving to Baltimore in the next, or we'll feel like it's moving to Baltimore. By the middle of the century, and probably sooner, Ottawa will look and feel like it's a different place. Now, tonight, that may not be such a bad thing, but in the summer it's going to be very hot and sticky. And this is a problem. We're a city that was built on the edge of the boreal, northern and cold. So we don't have nearly enough shade or cooling, and we've got way too much dark heat absorbing pavement and roofs. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, Laura. So look at all the red. This is from a report by the city that lists the 40 urgent priorities that have to happen over the next 3 years. Action needs to be happening. And the top of the list are all these red ones. I just wanted to look at the red. You can look at the document from the city. But heat is the biggest one and the top of the list, the most reds. And the circles, I've blown up a bit. The circles are the ones that are community issues. So these are issues that the community will face, and basically it's mainly up to us to deal with them. Next slide, please. This also comes from the city of Ottawa. All these references will be shared with you later. Our summers are going to get hot very fast. By 2030, that's just a little over 7 years from now, we're going to have 2.5 times, 2.5 times as many hot heat warning days as we had just in the 10 years ago. So that's like almost a month. By 2050, 1/3 of our summer is going to be hot heat warning type days. Next slide, please. We aren't ready and time is running out. The insurance industry for certain knows how big a problem how big a pickle we're in. And the key points that they want us to know are that, and this is important for all of us, the biggest problem is that most residents and businesses are unaware of the risks and their responsibilities and the actions that they need to do to protect themselves. Another point is that if people delay acting, it's going to cost multiple times the cost of acting now. And that's just the money. On top of that, there's going to be a lot of painful suffering, damage, changes in economy, all sorts of things. And a final point is that it's really important to act now for a lot of reasons, but $1 spent now in the most recent estimates, on average in Canada, will save between $13 and $15. So that's a pretty good multiplier. If I could get that in the stock exchange, I'd be happy. Next slide. The final message I want to do is we can do a lot to make our communities resilient. This is a picture of what a resilient low-rise community could look from. This comes from a Health Canada report, was in 2020. Notice it has a lot of greenery all over the place, trees for shading, a lot of green in the buildings, on the streets. The pavement is cool colors, light colors. What it doesn't show in this picture is that the report talks about the needs for green space, parks, water, covered recreational things outdoors. So this is a resilient community. Next slide, please. The next image, whoops, back up one, please. The next image is what would our high-rise communities look like? Well, at street level, they would look the same, but they can't use trees for shading. So they're going to there's other strategies, green roofs, white roofs, and different materials, and lots of trees on the balconies and the sides of them. And interestingly, 2 of these pictures are from Toronto and the spray painting is from New York. So this is not just being talked about. Next slide, please. There's a lot that we can do. Our speakers are going to be talking about what we can do to look after our health, some of the green actions we can take that'll make a big difference, and how important it is to get involved in planning so our communities start to look like we want them to. Next and final slide. And I guess an important point is that working together really helps. We hope that this panel discussion is the start of several years of learning and working together. And we've had, in some levels, a bit of fun with our team putting this together. And this is a shout out to some of the students that were helping us. So I'd like to now turn this over to Brenda. This is just a bit of an overview. Brenda Knight is from the Centretown Community Association, and she is going to be running the panel.
Okay, hi, good evening. So welcome as we've gone through everything that Joan has taken us through. So we've just started learning. There'll be a little quiz at the end. I'm just joking. Our first speaker is Martha Robinson. And Martha comes from City of Ottawa, and she's the planning committee for heat, extreme heat, cold, and smog. So she'll be speaking to us for about 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next person. So Martha, welcome, and go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for having us. I think I just stepping in at the last minute to replace my colleague. And anyways, just wanted to say that I may not, anyways, they're her slides, but I'm very familiar with the topic. So I'm just going to set the stage, I think, for why it is a health concern in Ottawa, extreme heat, and just to set the stage for everybody here. Birgit Isernhagen works with Ottawa Public Health and also is co-located with the City of Ottawa in the planning department. So she had input into the official plan, and she's working with the community or the climate resiliency unit as well. So she's well placed to ensure that public health concerns are integrated into city considerations. So I'm sharing my screen here, and we'll just go right into it. Not sure why I can't move the slides. So I can only do the slides when I'm in presentation mode. Does somebody have to give me presentation mode?
Give it a try now, just to see if I changed something, so maybe it'll work now.
No.
Okay, I didn't change anything else, so I don't know why it's working now, but it wasn't working earlier, or vice versa.
Martha, just when we went through the dry run a few moments before this started, I was having the same problem, and I was able to, if I scrolled closer to the bottom of my screen on the Zoom, little arrows popped up.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. So here we are. The top 5 climate risks in Ontario that have public health concerns are extreme heat is one of the top ones. The spread of infectious diseases that are transmitted by insects, ticks, and rodents. So vector-borne diseases like Lyme disease and West Nile virus. The third one is outdoor air quality. We've been experiencing lots of wildfire smoke issues with climate change. So I think we're all familiar with that. An increase in food and waterborne illnesses and diseases. With warmer temperatures come lots more opportunity for bacteria to grow. So it's associated really with the warmth. And then there's stratospheric ozone depletion. So those are the top 5 risks. The City of Ottawa, as Joan mentioned, had identified 40 risks specific to Ottawa, and just from the public health perspective, the province identified these five priorities for the province. So, who is most at risk to extreme heat? Just in general, the very young, the very old, people who are not used to our climate, so recent immigrants and tourists who may come from another climate, pregnant people, and people with chronic illnesses, including mental health conditions, depression and schizophrenia make people especially at risk because of some of the medications that they take, as well as their mental health condition. People with physical impairments and disabilities may have difficulty getting out of a hot environment and for other reasons. People who have outdoor occupations, as well as those who don't have air conditioning or who don't use it. I'm sure we all know older people who say, I have air conditioning, but I never use it. I hate it. So some people just don't use it. And again, people who are physically active outdoors, maybe because they are an athlete. And I can't see the last slide here for whatever. I think it was covering people who are experiencing homelessness. So people who don't have adequate shelter to get out of the heat. Notable adverse health impacts associated with extreme heat. The start early with the dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, which can be fatal, and then other health impacts like kidney injury to your kidneys, adverse pregnancy outcomes, worsening sleep patterns, worsening mental health, worsening of underlying cardiovascular disease and respiratory issues. Most people who are, many people suffer more heart related injuries during heat waves. And then there's increases in non-accidental and injury related deaths. The BC Coroner's report on the 2021 heat dome deaths, it was recently updated. There was very sad 619 heat-related deaths in the province. 98% of those deaths occurred indoors. 67% were older adults. There were high rates of death among people with chronic diseases, depression and schizophrenia I mentioned, as well as other chronic illnesses. 56% of people lived alone. Only 7% of the people who died had air conditioning, and most lived in socially or materially deprived neighborhoods. So, Jonah mentioned it, the city's projections are that we'll have 4 times as many hot days as in the future as we do now. Looking at 2050, that means 43 very hot days in the summer where the temperatures are over 30 degrees. And so the BC heat dome was is in the top of our minds as we're looking to plan and look ahead. There's been many other heat waves in Europe that I'm sure everybody can recall, and within North America, in Chicago and New York in the past. So there are many heat waves that have caused a lot of deaths in North America as well. So mitigation and adaptation play an important role in protecting people from extreme heat. Inside, using curtains and fans properly when it's hot, closing the curtains when the sun is coming into a home can make things a lot more comfortable than if the sun is streaming into your environment and warming it up. Some lifestyle things like having frequent cool showers and baths to stay cool if you have to stay in an indoor environment. Even things like soaking your feet and hands in cool water can help your body cool down. I think just under 80% of Ottawa homes reported that they had some form of air conditioning, which is really good news for Ottawa. It does also mean that 20% of people don't have air conditioning in their homes. So that's something we need to think about. So another just important message is because we did see so many people, not only in the BC heat dome, but in many heat waves, we see people having adverse outcomes when they live alone. So being able to connect with other people, it's reaching out to neighbors who live alone, or if you do live alone, connecting with people is really important. Those weather conversations that we have every day of our lives in Canada. Okay, outside, making sure you're dressing properly. Some people, because of mental health issues, do not dress properly. So dressing properly, wearing a hat, staying out of the sun, keeping lots of water, drinking lots of water. some of the environmental things I think will be covered here, planting trees to shade an area, and seeking out cool places. So this summer we added an interactive map to the Ottawa Public Health webpage on our extreme heat and humidity page. You can type in your address and it will show you the 20 closest places to go and cool down, and they include places like wading pools, indoor swimming pools, libraries, community centers, beaches, parks that have sunshade gazebos and stuff like that. So there's lots of places to cool down in Ottawa, and yeah, so people shouldn't be suffering inside with in the heat. So seeking outside cool spaces is a really important thing to do. And then, yeah, Birgit's put those resources there, places to cool off map, our Beat the Heat webpage. And the City of Ottawa also has a heat island map that I think is the next slide here. Yeah, so the urban heat island map is on both the Ottawa Public Health and the City of Ottawa mapping areas. There are links on there. I think Birgit's provided them at the end slide there, and you can go in and zoom in to see where there's a hot spot in your close to you or wherever. The map over to the far left shows that we have really nice cool areas where there's rivers, the Ottawa River, nice and blue. We have a big, huge green belt around the urban area that's nice and cool.
Oop. It looks like Martha's frozen there. Okay, Laura, should we?
I'm just gonna do a quick little message here.
Yeah,
See,
I was just gonna tell her we're at the end of her time frame too.
okay.
I think that's pretty
Technology.
well her presentation, Brenda.
Pardon me?
This is Joan speaking. I think that's the end of pretty well the end of
Okay.
this presentation anyway.
Okay, so then what we'll do is just move on to Andy then.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to pick up Martha later. Martha, sorry. Yeah, we'll have to pick her up later. That's too
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
One thing, can I just talk heat maps for 1 second? Because I'm very interested in them. So the hot spots, you can see the bright reds and the browns. Those are usually associated with parking lots or buildings with high, lots of black roofs, government buildings or hospitals or schools or things like that. They tend to be the worst, or else areas where there's very few trees, like some of the more high-rise towers and not very much else.
Okay, thanks, Joan. And well, we'll thank Martha when she gets back on. Anyhow, so next we've got Dr. Andy Kenney, and he's the Emeritus Professor, Faculty of Forestry, University of Toronto. And go ahead, sir.
Andy,
Oh dear, do we have?
Andy,
another-
hi. Andy, you're on mute.
Okay. Did we lose everybody?
Sorry.
Okay, you're on. You got your 10 minutes here, so.
Okay, thanks. I bear with me. I'm coming to you from the wilds of Lanark County, and sometimes I think our internet connection is driven by chipmunks on a treadmill. So I hope this comes through. Let me get my screen sharing going. Hopefully that's coming through.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm going to be talking about climate resilience and how it's associated with the resilience of the urban forest, because the urban forest plays an important role in mitigating climate change effects. So my focus is really going to be on resilience from a slightly different perspective, but directly related to climate. Yes, I'm also having issues with changing slides.
Okay, obviously we didn't pay our phone
There we
bills.
go.
Okay, here you go.
Yep, there we go. Another chipmunk just came on board. So we've really have to consider the functions or the benefits that urban forests provide. And as you can see, right at the top of the list here is microclimate amelioration, or the mitigation of the urban heat island. This is a long list of benefits or functions, though, and the good news is that all of these, and I don't really have time to go into each one, but the really important take-home message here is that this long list of functions or benefits, they're not mutually exclusive. So if we have a well-adapted, functioning urban forest, we get all of these benefits as a package deal, including impacts of the urban heat island. So in order to have these benefits delivered to urban society, extensive and equitable urban forest, two parts that I'm not going to get into tonight, but we also have to have a resilient forest, something that will withstand perturbations from various outside and inside factors. Once again, in order to try to maintain that long list of functions, including climate amelioration. Another important take-home message really can be shown to increase with the leaf area in detail, but just think of this as in a way, an analog to the so-called canopy cover. I'm not a big fan of the use of canopy cover as a metric, but leaf, I think. Leaf exponentially with tree size. Once again, sounds a bit academic, but the take-home message is big trees are important. We can't just simply plant crab apples everywhere and be satisfied with that. We need the big trees within the environment to really maximize those benefits. Of course, the forest, if we have this forest that's well developed and functioning well, are coming under a number of course, that's extreme weather events. Wind and ice, City of Ottawa is no stranger to these, droughts and flood. So those climate change factors are putting pressure on the urban forest, while at the same time we're expecting the urban forest to help mitigate climate factors. Pests and diseases are also a problem. Again, once again, the City of Ottawa is no stranger to the emerald ash borer in
Andy,
the
Andy, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but
slow-
we seem to be having a lot of connection issues. Would you like me to put up the version you sent me, and maybe that'll help with the connection? You can just focus on speaking.
Can we just try if I switch off my
Your camera?
Yeah,
Okay.
can't seem to get to that right now. Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you?
Okay.
Uh,
So you just stop your screen share and I'll put up mine.
okay.
Nope, I've gone too far, I guess. This one, I think, eh?
Okay, move along there.
Sorry? Are you still with us?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Sorry, everyone. We may have to move on to the next speaker for now.
Wow, we need more chipmunks in Lanark.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry about this, folks.
Okay, okay, you
Okay,
okay now,
let's
Andrew?
try to.
Yeah, yeah, close down your screen and see what happens, yeah.
You seem to be
Let's-
coming through now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to work through these pests and emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, mostly invasive. Again, a serious stressor. Then, and I'm sorry to be a bearer of bad tidings, but they're probably going to become. And infrastructure. So competition for space above and below ground is a big challenge. And also the actual process of building that infrastructure can be quite detrimental to the urban forest as well.
Okay, I think we're going to have to,
Next slide, please, Laurel.
okay.
This isn't ideal, but perhaps one possibility is I could record this on my own and provide the recording to you for distribution to the.
That
Yeah,
might,
Andy, I think that's a really good idea because we're just not hearing, you know,
yeah,
40% of what you're saying, and you're an expert in this, and you know, we need to learn. So how be we just move to plan B here? Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea, and we can sit and pull together. Well, we were planning to pull together a package and send out to everybody that attended anyhow. So if you did that recording and we
Yeah.
included it, will that work for you? Okay, well, I tell you. All right, we're gonna move on. Okay, now I know Mary's connections work, okay? Because she's the designer for the condo I live in. So
Don't jinx us, Brenda.
fingers crossed. Thank you, everybody who's attending for, you know, I don't know, maybe it's the snow that's causing this, who knows? But anyhow, Mary is our landscape designer for Living Green Landscaping, and go ahead, madame.
All right, hi everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm gonna go to share screen. If I can now. Just open up our slides. Can everyone see that? Okay. So my perspective coming into this panel is as a landscape designer, I do mostly residential work. So my focus is, while I would echo a lot of what Martha and particularly what Andy has been saying about, you know, dealing with climate resilience on a sort of larger scale, what my focus is going to be on is what individuals can do in their own homes in order to make their own properties somewhat more resilient to some of the weather events that we're seeing happen in our communities. So we're going to touch on 4 topics. We're going to touch on probably one of the most important ones, rainwater management. We're going to talk about ground covers on your property, and that includes mulches and basically whatever is covering your soil. We're going to talk briefly about creating shade. I think Andy was probably going to go in a little bit more detail about the importance of trees in general, and specifically to sort of whole climate health. And then finally, we'll talk a bit about plantings. I'll try to not get into too much of the nitty gritty with that, because I think any home gardener on this call could talk for hours about some of these things. So in terms of rainwater management, as we all know, climate's getting a little bit tougher in Ottawa. We've seen some very wet years. We've seen some very dry years. And all of us live in places where water falls onto our properties. what you do with your landscaping can really help control some of that water, and particularly take it out of the stormwater system, which is where we see a lot of the worst flooding, is all of the, not all, but a lot of the water that lands on our properties, on our roofs, on our asphalt driveways, on our roads, it all runs into the stormwater sewer system. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to keep that water on your property for your own benefit and for the benefit of the community. So one thing that's becoming more and more popular, and that a lot of people maybe have some confusion about, are permeable pavements. These can be interlocked stones, so your driveways, your walkways, they can be like the center picture here, which has what looks like artificial turf and stones. That is a permeable pavement. It is a system that is designed to let water run directly down instead of sending it off to a storm sewer, gutter, catch basin, whatever. And then over here, this other picture just shows it. Pea gravel and stepping stones, also permeable pavement. It means the water is going down and staying on your property. Go to the next slide. Some other things that you can do to keep water on your property instead of running off. You can attach a rain barrel to your downspouts. You can move your downspout rather than draining onto your driveway, have it drain into an adjacent garden or lawn. You can build a rain garden, which is essentially just a depression on your property that's filled with a bunch of mostly native plants, but they could be non-native plants, and we can talk about that as well. Or if you are in a particular situation where, say, you've got driveways that are close together and you don't have a lot of real estate to deal with a rain garden, you could do an infiltration trench or a soak-away pit, which is essentially just a basin on your property that collects water through gravel. You can cover it up with garden or lawn, and it's going to take that water and it's going to distribute it into the subsoil on your property. Ground covers are also an important part of our landscapes. You can use creeping plants to cover up the soil. You can use mulches like composted leaf mulch, composted pine mulch, shredded cedar. You can use river rock or pea gravel. Those are common mulches as well. Essentially what they do is protect your soil from completely drying out. And the way that they do that, or the way that it helps you manage water on your property, is that it keeps a lot of water in your property. So you'll see on really, really dry days, you'll see a lot of trees don't have any problem. You don't see wilting, you don't see, and that's because there's a decent water reserve underneath. Trees are very good at figuring out where they can get water. And so whatever you're putting on top of that soil can help keep that water in and help in those times of drought, so that a landscape is still doing everything that it's supposed to do. Leaves are still photosynthesizing and clearing air for us. So we've talked on it a bit. These are some examples of mulches or ground covers. We've got mixed ground cover plants. Here's your classic sort of periwinkle, great ground cover. This is composted pine mulch. Over here is an image of leaf mulch. Andy would probably have more to say about it, but the leaves on your property are super, super important to our ecosystems. You'll see lately there's more and more of a move to keep leaves on your lawns or on your properties somewhere. Part of that is because they make excellent compost, they make an excellent mulch, but also they're extremely important for insect larvae that overwinter on particular leaves. They're extremely important food source for all of the birds, squirrels, all sorts of things. They're the unseen sort of parts of our ecosystem that attach themselves to leaves and will really help the whole environment around your property thrive. So I would recommend, as much as you can, keep your leaves on your properties. There's nothing wrong with composting them, but where you have an opportunity, I'd recommend keeping your leaves around. We'll touch on this briefly because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Shady places are obviously much cooler than open ones, but I just wanted to point out there's so many things you can do to create shade on the side of your property. If you have the ability to use the east side of your property, obviously that's a natural barrier against the late day sun, which is just when it's at its hottest. But there are other ways that you can create shade on your property. So it could be something as simple as a shade sail. If you don't want to buy one of the super expensive ones, you can use a tarp, you can use a sheet, you can use a fabric. If you're a little bit crafty, you can make it really super beautiful, attach it to your house, and just find a little place to get some cover. Over here, this is a property in Old Ottawa South. It's got a massive tree, and they've built their landscape around it to have a really nice shady spot. You can use vines on trellises and pergolas. This one up here is just a really cool art installation. I think this one's in Portugal. I think it's been moving all around the world, where they strung up a whole bunch of umbrellas. I mean, the point is you can get really creative with small spaces or large spaces in order to create a shady little haven for yourselves. And then the final thing we'll talk on are the plantings. As everyone knows, you know, choosing the right plant for the right place is very, very important. Not all plants are equal. Not all plants can survive the same conditions. Native plants are particularly well adapted to our climate. And they're extremely important for wildlife, as we touched on briefly. But I am not a purist when it comes to using native plants in urban landscapes, simply because they don't always perform well and really thrive under certain urban conditions. We don't live in an area where, before it was developed, we had plants that needed salt tolerance because there wasn't really any salt. But we live in cities and we put salts on our sidewalks, we put salts on our roads. So salt and snow and build up things that we've altered the environment to become not the natural way that they were. In that sense, I think that there are plenty of plants that you can use that are not native that are perfectly fine to use in your landscapes. Another thing I'd like to touch on is that the more variety that you have in terms of evergreens, perennials, trees, the better your landscape will be able to sustain things like flooding and things like droughts. Monocultures don't seem to survive catastrophic events very well. So the more variety that you have on your property, maybe there's a particularly hot summer and you lose a plant or two because they prefer to have cooler conditions. That's fine. If you've got a whole bunch of different plants adapted to different situations on your property, then you're more likely to have a successful landscape. And the last two slides are simply for people who are really interested in native plants and are interested in growing some more on their properties. These is just a small selection of some of my personal favorites. They seem to be tough. They seem to grow well in many city conditions. Do not take my word on this. They will not grow in absolutely every condition. But these are some of my favorites. Serviceberry is a great spring blooming, great for a small property. We've got woodland phlox, the yellow flowering shrub, that's pot of gold, which is a native hypericum, which is just smothered in bees midsummer. Of course, there's butterfly weed, which everyone's familiar about with monarch butterflies. Their larvae feed exclusively on that species or on that genus, sorry. Yeah, so these are some go-tos if people are looking to incorporate native plants into their properties but haven't had much of a chance to really explore them yet. These are some good options to try. And my last slide is just a few plants that, for those particularly tough conditions, these things seem to be so tough. So you've got your native, you're not native, you've got your fall stone crop, which I think most people would be familiar with. Junipers, even though this juniper is not a native one, it is very, very good for wildlife. Birds will hide in them, squirrels will use them. This is catmint, which is looks a lot like lavender, but it's just tough as nails. So anyway, these again, they're just a few of my sort of go-to plants for tough situations. They're either drought tolerant, salt tolerant, shade tolerant, or two to three of them. So yes, that just about wraps it up. Here's some further resources in case anybody's interested. I find these are great websites if you're interested in learning how to manage water on your property. If you're interested in looking up certain plants, the Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder is excellent. It treats native plants just like any other ornamental garden plant that we're used to seeing in nurseries. So you'll see, you know, exactly what zone it's supposed to grow in, where it's native to, what its uses are, sizes, etc., soil preferences. And yeah, that does it for me, Brenda. Is that good?
No, you came in on time and one quickly question that, and we're definitely going to have time for questions later on. If anybody here is saying, what is the simplest thing that we can do on our own landscape? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, I do. And I can't actually take credit for it. I'm going to give it to Julia Robinson from the city of Ottawa. I think she might be watching the Zoom. We had a meeting earlier this week. Move your downspouts. If your downspout is spilling onto your driveway, redirect it. Spill it onto a lawn, spill it onto a garden. Don't let that runoff go into the street. It's the number one thing I think that you can do. And then where you can, just plant plants. Try things out. Like I said, I'm not a purist for native plants. I think that they are in many ways better than other plants that you see in nurseries, but I don't think that anyone should be faulted for trying out new plants in their gardens. Don't plant invasive plants, but do plant something if you can. If you can seed a little bit of lawn to garden, then do it. If you can give up a little bit of space for a tree, go ahead and do it. A tree, Andy would have maybe said this, when are you supposed to plant a tree 20 years ago, right? So do it as soon as you can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we're on to our last presenter, and then we're going to go through our questions that have been online that are going into chat, and you guys are doing really good. So thank you very much. So our next person is going to be Toon Dreessen, and he's the president of Architects DCA. So go ahead, Toon, you're on.
I'm on, and you can see
Yep.
the slides. Excellent.
And hopefully we will have technical, no problem.
Excellent. Sounds good. Well, fingers crossed. So thanks very much for having me here. So it's first of all important to realize that it's all connected. Everything is connected. Everything we do is connected. Everything, all the speakers have spoken today is all connected. We don't make decisions in isolation. So how we choose to design our homes, our communities, our cities is in itself interconnected. Our homes don't exist in isolation. They affect and are affected by their community. If we want to achieve social equity, social justice, and create places that are welcoming, inclusive, and accessible, we can't do that without considering the impact of design on our daily lives. Our sense of well-being is intimately linked to what we design, how we live, our sense of social connectedness, and how we feel about our surroundings. Our built environment affects our mental and physical health, our sense of belonging, and our sense of community. Our approach to sustainability drives all of these factors and in turn is driven by them. And that helps us achieve our goals. Sustainability outcomes aren't in isolation. If they are, they're just greenwashing. So we can't do one of these things well without considering the other. You may have seen me share this infographic before. We spent far too long debating if climate change is real and failing to take meaningful action. I know where we are in this chart and how pressing it is that we take action, but sometimes it feels hopeless. So whether it's an election outcome or a new apartment building around the corner we don't like, we have to see that these are political decisions. So the number one thing we need to do is to become politically engaged. Every decision on the built environment is a political decision on some level. Planning applications, zoning bylaws, official plans, siting and locations of new community infrastructure, budgets, these are all political decisions that affect how we live and how we get the community we strive for. And the old adage is true, that we need to think big about the big global issues, but we also need to take local and immediate action. So what can we do today, tomorrow, and next week to make our homes and communities resilient? Yes, we should absolutely invest in electric buses. That's a good thing. And electric cars are also fine in that both of them are better than fossil fuel burning vehicles. And our grid in Ontario is pretty clean, and it's certainly cleaner than it was a generation ago. But an electric bus only lasts about a decade, and an electric car about the same. So by doing so, we commit to our billions of dollars in replacement costs for short-lived equipment, while our buildings sit there and continue to crumble and decay, and we miss an opportunity to invest in buildings that generally sit there quietly, not moving and not using any energy for decades. Sometimes you can get rebates for buying an electric car that needs an expensive infrastructure to charge and maintain and operate, but you never see rebates for electric bikes that need less infrastructure or maintenance and have much longer lifespans and are both better for the economy and better for our health. So we need to invest in electrifying our buildings if we want to make real strides on achieving our goals. But just converting a gas furnace to an electric furnace isn't going to do it. So remember when I said everything is all connected? Well, electric heat is very, very efficient, but it needs a better building to make it viable. Better insulation, better windows, more efficient air movement to keep us healthy and cool. To tackle summer heat, we don't need to just keep pumping in air conditioning. That's a recipe for disaster. We need better insulation. We need better windows. We need shade from trees. We need better ventilation and cross ventilation so that we can reduce our dependence on air conditioning and still feel comfortable and healthy. The key isn't to just electrify our home's energy needs, but to go back to the 3 R's. We need to reduce our energy need to make a more efficient building that needs less energy. That means more insulation, a better building envelope, more efficient lighting. We need smaller spaces that take less energy to heat and cool and are located in a community where we can shop, work, or otherwise meet our community's daily needs by walking, biking, or taking transit. We need to reuse. We need to adapt our buildings instead of tearing them down to build new ones. We need to reuse our infrastructure by gently intensifying instead of building more suburbs that take away green space, which is essential to keep our environments cool and healthy. We need to reuse energy by conserving it and extracting waste heat from exhaust air or water so that we waste less energy. This chart on the left is the age of public housing owned by the Toronto Community Housing Agency and closely resembles that of many other Canadian cities. We invested enormously in the 60s and 70s and very little ever since, as this tweet from the Justice Queen points out. When we think of parks and public spaces, we've completely failed to invest in urban environments, in public parks, public pools. We don't keep them open. We don't do nearly enough in our urban environments that suffer the most from heat island effects and lack of green space. We also need to recycle. We need to use energy from recyclable sources, power our buildings with solar or wind or other renewables, and low or no waste energy sources. We have to start using ground source district heating and cooling systems and air source heat pumps to take advantage of natural and regenerative systems. We need to look at renewable building materials. Concrete buildings are great for high rises, but they consume enormous amounts of energy to create that concrete. A mass timber building can be made of small trees that sequesters carbon instead of using it. Renewable building materials that are good for our health and good for our planet can be recycled when the building is at the end of its life or needs to be modified. Mass timber buildings are also a more human scale, and they have a lesser impact on our infrastructure. They're easier to heat and cool sustainably. If a sample gas bill shows that an annual consumption of 2,200 cubic meters of natural gas in a modest bungalow is normal, and let's pretend that it is, that converts to some 23,500 kilowatt hours of electricity. If that could be magically converted overnight, I'd be fine. Some of that gas bill can be trimmed by converting to an induction stove, getting rid of a gas dryer or gas hot water tank. And those are small potatoes, and that might amount to 50 or so cubic meters a month. But just converting an electric furnace to results in hydro bills in the thousands of dollars a year. If you add to that the $20,000 or so it costs to convert a gas furnace to an electric furnace, you can see clearly that's not a solution by itself. But if you improve the wall insulation, increase thermal performance of doors and windows, and you start to make a difference. So say that peak current natural gas demand of 400 cubic meters of gas that you need in the dead of winter, that converts to about 4,200 kilowatt hours in a month. If you can reduce that by 40% just by improving the envelope, you drop that to 2,500 kilowatt hours. And if a single solar panel can produce 1.8 per day, that's about 54 per month. It means you need 46 solar panels. That means you need about 92 square meters of roof-mounted solar panel, or about 1,000 square feet of solar panel on a roof, and you've met all of your energy needs, even on the peak winter days. But suppose you don't have 92 square meters of roof to use. Then you go back to the 3 R's. What other energy load can you reduce? Is there another energy source to reuse? Is there a source of energy you can recycle? That starts to trigger questions about other sources, like ground source heat pumps. And we've balanced those costs against how you can share that with district heating systems. All that leads towards passive house standards. If you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to check out Lloyd Alter's book, Living the 1.5 Degree Lifestyle. Passive house standards should be our goal. We should be working towards making our buildings better, and as a bonus, get better social outcomes, healthier environments, and better experiences. This costs money to do, but the payback is enormous. On the top right is an image of the Ontario Association of Architects headquarters. I was part of the committee that oversaw the renovation carried out by David Fujiwara Architect on Ruth Cocker's original building. Affectionately, it's considered a 6-sided glass box on stilts. It isn't really, but there's an awful lot of glass in the building. It's a weird irregular shape with lots of bits sticking out, and it's lifted up on posts, so there's exposed to weather on all sides. It's a 26,000 square foot building, so it's not small, but in the typical hydro bills in a year, we're well into the 6 figures. After the renovations and keeping the building the same look and shape, we'd reduce those hydro bills to about $50 in the worst month. The payback on that renovation is 17 years based on 2015 utility rates. And so if utility rates go up, that can be reduced to payback of a decade or less. Introducing cross ventilation has been absolutely key to achieving summer thermal comfort. So we need to ask ourselves, what can we do? Well, to begin, we need to demand better building codes. So remember when I said at the beginning, it's all connected and that architecture is political? Well, in this article from April of this year, Chris Ballard shows us how our codes are going backwards. At one time, Ontario was a leader and we were slowly moving towards a net zero energy code. But under the current government, no more. The cost of upgrading insulation, replacing energy sources, and improving energy efficiency in our homes isn't cheap. It can run to tens of thousands of dollars, and it's not unrealistic to imagine a 6-figure cost to renovate your home to achieve a net zero standard. Lack of funding choices means that this is individually financed. So we need governments to step up with real funding, or organizations like the Toronto Atmospheric Fund, as well as banks and insurance companies, to create models where resilient, reliable, and energy efficient communities have better access to better funding. We also need to design like it matters. We don't enforce existing building codes and standards for durability or resilience, and instead we pawn off the life cycle cost of buildings, suburbs, and other infrastructure to future generations. So we need to see design not as a commodity, but as an investment that pays off in better, transformative, positive social outcomes. We need to think of the things we can do locally. Can we plant a tree? Can we plant a garden? Can we walk to the grocery store or ride a bike? Can we buy local goods that don't need to be transported as far? When our windows need to be replaced, can we make them better than they were before? Can we live in a slightly smaller space? Can we wear a sweater, turn the heat down slightly or the air conditioning up a bit? How can we reduce our energy needs? Even just a set point of a few degrees can make a huge difference. When we see an info project being proposed in our neighborhood, can we support it because it means less sprawl, less parking, and more neighbors to support our local businesses? When we see bike lanes being proposed, can we support them so that it's safer for us or our kids to get to the store, school, or work? And lastly, we need to build for resilience. The increasingly extreme weather events, whether that's worsening cold or more extreme winters, or more severe summer storms, will continue to test the ability of our grid to provide our homes with power. Making our homes independent of that reliance means we're literally able to weather the storm. Better thermal resistance means that even if we're out of power for several days, and we lose heat, we can survive winter better. There are stories of passive houses in Quebec during ice storms that lose power for days or a week at a time, and everybody stays comfortable and healthy. We need to design for resilience so that we have cross drafts for ventilation and less need for air conditioning. Having a resilient community means we can go to the local store, park, or community center to meet our daily needs for food, community, and solace. Thanks very much for having me.
Hey, thank you very much. That was, well, there's a lot there. Like, I guess one question, Toon, and then we're going to go on to the ones that are in the chat room. What has to happen for us to see the action we need? Like, we know it's necessary, but what more do we have to do to make sure that our city is resilient, sustainable, and equitable?
We have to realize that design matters, and design matters in all things, whether it's a bike lane, a city project, a maintenance plan, you know, a big project like a library or a small project like a parklet. Design matters in all of these things, and especially when it comes to public dollars being spent. We spend poorly, we design cheaply, we maintain inadequately, and we do this habitually over and over again under the belief that doing so is doing cheap, is saving money, is worth something. You know, the Twitter discussion today about stairs on public footbridges and public parks and places, you know, it would cost a fraction of the life cycle cost of maintenance, decay from salt, and damage if we just put in a modest heating system and never salted those sidewalks and stairs, and they'd be open and accessible year round and never need snow plows and salt because we would take care of them. But we cheap out and we don't value the effort that goes into designing beautiful things, and then they decay and fall apart. So we have to see that design matters.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that's the end of our formal presentations. So now I'm going to introduce Carolyn McKenzie, and Carolyn is chair of the Glebe Community Center Planning Committee. So he's already told you some things we need to do under planning, right, Carolyn? But anyhow, Carolyn's the one who's going to pull together the questions that you've got in the chat. So I'm going to hand the baton off to her.
Great. Thank you very much, Brenda, and thank you to all the presenters. Sorry, we had a few technical difficulties there earlier, but lots of great detail.
Sorry to interrupt, Carolyn.
Yep.
We didn't do our poll yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Why don't you
put that up quick? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Perfect. So just a very quick poll for everyone. As you know, this webinar is being co-hosted by the Glebe Community Association and the Centretown Community Association. And so we were focusing sort of our promotion for this event within those communities, but happy to have anyone who's interested in the topic. So this is just a poll to sort of get a sense as to where people have actually come from, and looking at the numbers, and I think everyone else can see this as well as you complete the poll. Lots of people from Centretown, the Glebe, and other neighborhoods in Ottawa, which is fantastic. Also, one person from outside of Canada, or maybe that's me, and also outside of Ottawa. So yeah, we'll just let those numbers run, but I guess we've got 100% of the answers there. So I'll end the poll, but that's kind of an interesting mix. Nice to see lots of people from outside of these two communities as well. Brenda mentioned that, so I just happened to chair the Glebe Community Association, the planning committee, and I got interested in supporting this. I'm really here as kind of a support function to the environment committees. But from a planning perspective, I'm interested in some of the ideas, and Toon, I think you touched on some of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of planning issues for the community. So, and those issues really, in some case, go beyond what you might as an individual do on your own property, but how as a community we need to think about potentially the use of right-of-way, imagining where we see very wide streets, how we potentially might reimagine that right away being used for bike lanes or greening or planting of trees, all of those kind of things. So, and I think we anticipate as a group further or ongoing discussion from tonight's discussion, where we get into some of the nuts and bolts and advocacy to the city in particular for some of the policy items, whether it be not building code, but planning, rezoning would be chief amongst them. That things that we might want to be targeting for advocacy work to allow for some of the ideas that we're talking about tonight. So, anyway, with that, I just wanted to start off the questions, and there's some good questions that have been placed into the chat. So I would encourage anyone else as you're listening along to open up the chat and feel free to add more questions. I've been trying my best to keep track of them as they come in, and we'll try to get as many answered. We have a fair chunk of time, and I think our intent is to the extent that we don't answer all of the questions tonight, we'll try and get those questions addressed and feed answers back to everyone following the webinar tonight. So Laura, if I could just ask you, I'm going to start off actually by asking Laura, our technical person for this webinar, to put up an image of the heat maps. And these were put together by the Carleton students who were supporting this webinar. So there are a couple of maps that we'll provide these maps to you as well as part of the resources that follow this webinar. But basically, you can see from these maps, and what they show is that we're facing a pretty big challenge. And I don't want to belabor this point, but I do think it's interesting because they are these two communities, and this information is available across the city actually, as Martha Robinson had mentioned. They're all available online, but particularly in Centretown, in which almost the entire area is a hotspot. And the Centretown is obviously on the right, and you see lots of orange indicating heat islands, impacts. On the left, that's the Glebe, and you can see where there's some red circles, particularly hotspot areas. Parking lots, Lansdowne, interestingly, as a big circle there. So I guess one of the things that we're thinking about, and Toon, maybe I'll guide this towards you, is it, when we think about the heat island effect in our communities, what's your sense of what the future impact is likely to be once we intensify? Is it possible to actually reduce the heat island effect while we intensify? And I suppose if not, could we at least try not to make it worse than these maps indicate?
I think it's definitely possible to do. I have my own experience of trying to do this and being shot down left, right, and center by the city and by their own planning department, and meeting stiff resistance and trying to do something better. So that's frustrating. The snarky comment from senior city staff saying this isn't Barcelona, Mr. Dreessen, you can't do that, is hard to live with if we're trying to get a better city. And challenging the paradigm of the city that we want to be tomorrow, as opposed to the city we are today, is an ongoing challenge. And we need to look at these things like taking Bank Street from a huge paved right-of-way with narrow sidewalks and barely enough space for, pedestrians or someone in a wheelchair or a stroller, to actually taking away lanes of parking. We need to be bold. We need to be courageous. We need to take away lanes of parking and make wider sidewalks so we can put in trees. As Andy, I think, said, they can't just be little spindly sticks that get ignored and die in a salt bed. They need to be chunky, good-sized trees that have a chance of surviving, and they need to be given the room to grow. We need to think holistically about the planning we do, so that when we spend tens of millions of dollars ripping up a street to put in new sewers, we make the extra effort to bury the hydro lines so that we can plant a decent-sized tree and have good tree cover. And we need to be bold and courageous about doing that, because the residents who live in the two maps on the screen, there's hundreds of thousands of people, I'm sure, who, I don't know the number of the population number, but there's loads and loads of people who live in this area who lack that access to shade and to street trees and to street cover. and get no benefit from the tax dollars they're spending for the infrastructure that they're living in. So we need to see that change happen, and it needs to be a holistic, thought out design approach. And it requires a change in paradigm thinking from senior staff, senior leadership, and on down to advocate for better design.
Great, thank you. Yeah, those are all really interesting ideas. I see Martha Robinson, you've put something in the chat there talking about artificial turf and black roofs and pavement being huge factors that increase urban heat islands. Perhaps the artificial turf is I didn't realize that about artificial turf, actually. Perhaps that's the reason that Lansdowne and what looks to be anyway, the football field potentially at Lansdowne is showing up as a bit of a circle in the heat island. But Martha, do you want to speak to that just a little bit?
Well, sure. Yeah, they're made with crumbled tile.
Oh, I think we may be losing you there, Martha. Their connection is not, but if you want to, perhaps I can ask you to add a bit more to the chat, and I can pick up on that in a moment. Andy, do we still have a decent connection with you? Did you want to add anything to that in terms of tree canopy? I wonder if that's something that you are encountering as an issue, trying to intensify the issue of intensification and making space for large trees, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that this is critical to keep in mind that not only do we need trees, but we need space to accommodate trees. And something that I wish I had time to do in my research career was to look at the point where increasing urban density line of income crosses the line with the canopy cover. And you get to some point, if you take it to the extreme, where we may have maximum building density but minimal canopy cover. So it's trying to find that balance that's critical. I think I'd also like to inject here a comment that often gets forgotten, is that the vast majority of the urban forest is on private property. We turn to the city and in terms of public space, and that's really important. But in many cases, 80 to 90% of the urban forest is actually on private property. So that's backyards, side yards, front yards, but also institutional and commercial areas. So a number of the speakers referred to the importance of working together and working as a community, in essence, and that's really critical in terms of a resilient urban forest as well.
Great. Yeah, no, that's good. Tony, maybe I'll come back to you just for a moment. And Andy was just mentioning the urban tree canopy, and that so much of it is actually on private land. Can you speak to the I assume you're familiar with the Trees and Trust program. Can you speak to that program at all? And perhaps what in any others that you've run into that contribute to that canopy?
No. Sorry, I'm just kidding. I don't know that much about the Trees and Trust program, unfortunately. I mean, but the truth is that trees that are on private property we treat them as being owned by the owner of that property, and that as if they have any right to do anything they want with that property. And we need to start seeing a bit of a sense of a more collective approach to how we treat things that are part of our collective experience. And I'm not saying that we can't allow a property owner to do something with something that is on their land and in their bounds, but we need to find ways to incentivize the desire to keep trees, to keep green space, and to be able to make trade-offs. If someone's got a tree that's on their property, that's a valuable part of the community, and it decreases the buildable space in their lot by 50%. Well, What if we took that space and moved it to another part of the site or another part of the building, or reduced some setbacks elsewhere to allow that tree to kind of continue to grow? There's a really spectacular house. There was one in my slide. There's a spectacular house in Hintonburg where an enormous, beautiful tree was preserved. And the house that was created by severing the lot was created and kind of moved off to the side, reduced setbacks, and it allowed that street frontage to continue. I believe it was designed by Paul Carrick Architects. And it's a spectacular way of showing that that tree may be owned by somebody, but it's part of a community and it's part of the larger neighborhood. And that's the sort of design thinking we have to imagine.
Yeah, that's
Couldn't
great.
agree more, Tom.
Darlene, I'm just wondering if you might have some perspective regarding the Trees and Trust program and how that's been going, and what the sort of discussion with the city is about that, and also just a sense of you know, how much, I don't know how many people, maybe people who come to this sort of a webinar are aware of the Trees and Trust program, but I suspect that many are not, and maybe you can just provide some perspective on that program.
Sure. I can't speak for the city, and it is their program, but I can only speak to my observations. The city doesn't really do any active promotion from what I can tell. And I know that, for example, the Glebe Community Association and the old Ottawa South one as well did a very active community effort to actually put the city's own pamphlets on the Trees and Trust program into people's mailboxes and tried to do a community promotion of the city's own program. And I don't know what the success of that was. I do know that the Glebe made more requests for Trees in Trust compared to Centretown last year. So that kind of speaks to there being some modicum of success when people actually actively promote it. It is a great program because you get a free tree on the city allowance at no expense. The city does all the planting, but you'd have to agree to maintain it for 3 years. And that means watering it, making sure it doesn't dry out, mulching it if need be. So in theory, it's a great program. It just needs people pushing it to make it happen. I know that it was delayed this year because of the derecho storm. So the city was very busy clearing up after the storm. And so it missed the spring planting window for the Trees and Trust program. But I haven't had the opportunity to ask the city whether that they made up for it this fall or not.
Okay, thanks, Darlene. Mary, I have a couple questions in the chat. I think there are a couple of quick ones probably for you, but let me just start with the first one. Someone has posted, I have interlock on top of a foot of crushed stone. Does the water make it through all of the crushed stone? This is obviously related to water incursion that we're starting to experience and with our bigger storms.
I mean, without seeing it, I couldn't tell you. It would depend if it was purely just crushed stone and then a thin layer of a bedding and then your stones and then bedding in your joints, then it is permeable. If you've got polymeric sand between the joints and those stones, then it is not permeable.
Right, okay. If there's a follow-up to that, but even just understanding some of the factors to be thinking about and what it depends on it is useful. But if there's a follow-up to the question, whoever had posed that question, feel free to throw that in the chat. I'll try and circle back. Next question, and you had mentioned about leaving leaves in the garden and the importance of those leaves to the ecosystem. Someone's asking, what's the latest you should move leaves from your lawn to the place they'll spend the winter, assuming that you've made the decision to keep them on your property, to ensure that you're not actually hurting the pollinators that are overwintering. Many people put them in the gardens to help, but is there sort of a rule of thumb as to when to start raking them up and doing something, mulching them, or doing something different with them?
No, moving them into your garden is a perfect place to put them if you want to overwinter your leaves there. If you put them in bags and they go to get composted, a lot of those larvae are going to survive, and they're still, I don't know where the city compost sites are. So I'm not trying to say that nobody should be taking leaves off of their properties, but if you can put them in your garden beds and wait until sort of mid to late spring, once the eggs have become larvae, then you're certainly doing, you know, a lot of good for the larger ecosystem in your neighborhood.
Right. Okay, that's great. And you mentioned mid to late spring for moving them. I know, I think this May was the first time that I became aware of the phrase "no mow May" for people, you know, not cutting their lawn. I assume that that's related to the issue of not touching any leaves that have been left behind, trying to leave those.
Yeah, I actually haven't heard of that, but that's probably it. I mean, I'm not an entomologist or ecologist, so I can't say necessarily, but I think there's, you know, a quick web search would let you know what the best practice is for that.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And one final question before I change tack a little bit. Someone's asking, do you need to crush the leaves?
No, you don't need to. You can. A lot of people will, it helps break down the leaves if you're eventually turning them into compost and say forking them into your garden. Most insect eggs are extremely small. But in mulching them, crushing them, let's say, you're going to impact some of them, but probably not all. So I'd say mulching and leaving on your yard is probably better than taking off of your yard. But if you can leave them whole, rake them into your garden beds, and you know, deal with them in the spring once the eggs have had a chance to hatch.
Great.
Sorry, there was one question about maple tar spot. Maybe Andrew would have something to say about that. As far as I know, maple tar spot is a cosmetic disease. I'd imagine there's circumstances where it can get quite bad, but maples typically tend to weather tar spots, so I don't think that it's a spore, so it's going to be spreading in the air anyway, no matter where you put it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Maple tar spot is usually just considered a cosmetic problem, and it's particularly problematic in Norway maple, which I'm going to use as a segue to a comment about native versus non-native. Mary, you said that you weren't a purist in terms of native plants. Nor am I, as far as it comes to the urban forest and the trees. But I would like to add to that, the critical point is not native versus non-native. It's invasive versus non-invasive. I think we have to be avoiding invasive species in our properties, particularly ones that are adjacent to semi-natural areas where the invasives can spread in. So I just ask people to keep that in mind when they're looking at their planting lists.
Great, thanks, Andy. One of the questions was just kind of commenting on the fact, the idea that like a lot of the solutions that we're hearing tonight are certainly good for homeowners in Centretown in particular, but not just in Centretown. A lot of people are living in condos, rental apartment buildings, that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily, you know, you're not necessarily picturing a single or a duplex with a you know, surrounded by lawn area, what have you. Any ideas about what tenants can do to help bring these solutions for residents in Centretown and those types of areas? And maybe Mary, I'll start with you again.
I mean, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure, other than talking to your landlord and seeing if they would give up some space if you want to plant a garden. Ask them if they're willing to put a tree. I mean, I think that if you are a renter, you're limited in what you can change on the property. But I think it'd be worth asking your landlords if you haven't done that yet, or the property owners. In terms of condos, I'm afraid I don't know much. Brenda probably has a pretty good model for how to have a garden committee and a condo board. So.
And are there anything, I'm just wondering about, you know, people who are doing plantings on balconies, anything in particular to think about, or things that, you know, maybe work better in that sort of setting, for, you know, for people in that, in a, you know, high rise or mid rise situation, or limited
We've had
to
speakers
balcony
come in,
garden?
Carolyn. We've had speakers come in, and we've had gardening lunch and learn sessions, and they're extremely well attended.
Mhm.
Okay, and you know, I am in a condo, and you know, we have people submit the questions and say, I live on the north side, I live on the south side, and it's a very informative thing to do. So if anybody is interested in that, what you do is you call Master Gardeners of Ottawa. They're fabulous. They're subject matter experts. They'll come in and do it, and you know, we can share some information with you. But I would say that's a very useful tool, and they'll show you what to plant on the balcony, what you can't plant, and all the rest of that, and even what you can grow inside your house. So that would be my suggestion for multi-units.
Another idea might be to, if you don't have a lot of balcony space at home, to pester the city about planting more vegetation in local parks.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Which can be more of a challenge perhaps, but
Don't get me on that one, Laura.
possibly very rewarding.
Sparks Street Mall has empty planters. They should be letting the public go in and plant.
Fully
Okay,
agree.
so, yeah.
Okay, that's great. And we're all of these, as these references are made to different groups and organizations, we're going to try and capture all these and put together a reference list and a resource list. There's a lot of information, things being mentioned tonight very quickly. So we'll do our best to capture all of these and to provide those resources if people want to dig in a little further. Tony, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, part of that conversation is that we need to recognize that today is not yesterday, and is not the city that we want to be tomorrow. So I think it was earlier this year, time has no meaning. You know, there was those stories in the bylaw stories of people who were getting, you know, had gone away for the long weekend, and their, you know, wild bee garden had been completely mowed down by the city because it was unsightly from a neighborhood complaint. You know, and we all wring our hands and say, oh, that's terrible, that's awful, what should you do? Well, it's because it's bylaw driven by complaints, by somebody not wanting to have this unsightly garden. And that's kind of bullshit, to my opinion. You know, and at the same time, you know, earlier in the summer, there was someone who had gotten a bylaw complaint because they'd widened their driveway with interlock to make a 2-car driveway. And so, you know, which one is it? Are we going to complain about people not having a landscape garden, and we're going to complain about them having an extra interlock? You know, what are the rules? How do we come up with something that is fair and that is reasonable, and allow people not to mow their lawn and have a wild garden instead? Where do we draw the line on what we consider to be an acceptable neighborhood standard? And or should we at all? Should we just let it be a free-for-all? How do we make that fair and reasonable to people, and allow people to live the lives that they want to live on their own land, on their own property, and have a garden for bees, and have a vegetable garden, and grow cabbages in their front lawn, and make their lives suit the way they want to live? And we need to embrace that, and embrace that diversity that's in our communities. I have some photos that I can share from a travel trip, but we need to be a more welcoming and accepting city that is going to be subject to change. We're not all going to live in a 1950s postcard picture suburbia of, you know, perfectly smooth lawns and, you know, 3-car driveways, and we're not going to live like that, and that's not a sustainable way to have our future.
Yeah, no, that's it's interesting. I'm looking at there's some comments being dropped in here to the chat as well, which is terrific. Love the questions. Also love to hear the comments on what's being said, or elaboration and ideas. Someone has just commented the city are reviewing their bylaws regarding right-of-way and boulevard gardening for our kids, which is a volunteer organization. The name of a volunteer organization has been working with Councillor Ralston King to do this. So that's kind of interesting. Again, sort of reimagining, you know, the right of way. A lot of people think of the right of way as just being the road. Of course, if you were to go on to Geo Ottawa, which is the city of Ottawa's geographic information site, a data-driven site, but it's interactive, map-driven. You would, and you click on a property, any given property, and I know my property there's a sidewalk, and I don't know, we don't own the first, I'll say about the first 8 feet of what I think of as my front lawn, and I think that's pretty common for many people across the city. So what so the right of way actually includes what we see as the road, and then typically the sidewalk, and in many cases a number of feet up the front lawn as well. So I don't think it's not a matter of taking away people's front lawn, but perhaps imagining these wide swaths of asphalt which are adding to the heat island effect. Perhaps rethinking of how we might want to use that as a community, as a society, and to tackle some of these issues, whether it's some of the things that were talked about as far as capturing the rainwater so that we don't just send it down into our rainwater systems, which is costly in terms of infrastructure, but using more green, so-called green infrastructure for capture. So keep the comments coming. We'll be saving all of the chat and pulling, because it gives us a better idea also obviously of what people are interested in for future webinars or future workshops too. So keep those coming as well. Let me just go to back to some of the questions though that were posted. There was a question about, this is kind of an interesting one. It's a question about roofing. When it comes time to replace mine, are there heat reflecting materials I should be looking at? Toon, I think I'm gonna aim that towards you. But one interesting thing I'll just add, because it's relevant to this question, is that I recently became aware that through the Ottawa Public Library system, you can actually take out thermal cameras. They apparently have 5 thermal cameras that are available to be borrowed, and so that you can image, well, whatever you want to point the camera at. I suppose I'm no expert to measure the surface temperature. It uses infrared imaging, allowing you to identify hot as well as cold spots in your home, showing you where you might need more insulation, where air is entering or exiting your home. So that's kind of an interesting aside. But for those of you who are wondering, how hot is my roof? That thermal, it might be kind of an interesting exercise to go to your local library. Not all of them have them. I think they're just in 5 locations. So best to go on the public library website and find out where they are. But if you're wondering how much heat is actually being picked up and reflected by your roof, and to what extent the roofing material is an issue, that might be of interest. Toon, do you want to just are you able to talk
Sure.
about heat reflecting materials though?
Sure. The challenge is going to come down to how much you want to spend. Unfortunately, the challenge is that asphalt shingles, which come in varying scales and sizes and price points, asphalt is naturally black. It's goopy black tar. So trying to make it something not black takes considerable effort. Likely the easiest and least expensive is to choose the lightest color granules that go on top. So the little thin granules of grit that are on top of those shingles. So if you choose something that is as light colored as possible, that's going to be your least costly to do. And you'll get something that's sort of a light gray material, and that's certainly going to help. And that's an easy decision you can make. To go beyond that, on a conventional sort of shingled roof, starts to get sort of increasingly tougher and more expensive. And that's just because beyond asphalt shingles, you don't really tend to have a lot of choices for things. So you can go to a metal roof, either a standing seam metal roof or metal shingle roof. You can go to different types like that, and then you can get a lighter colored. I wouldn't go white, just because anything really white gets pretty dingy, grimy looking pretty quickly, but a light colored material like a light gray. But your price point for that roofing work jumps up pretty dramatically. Now, if you have a flat roof, if you live in a building with a flat roof and you're replacing that, you can look at other alternatives. There are white colored roof membranes, either TPO, which is a thermoplastic something or another, I can't remember what it stands for, but it's a single ply or multi-ply white roof membranes. And you'll see those used more on commercial buildings. And they can also be done on residential flat roof buildings. You can use that. You can use a coating material, which is like essentially a white paint. And I think there was an image of that in one of the first slides, that can be applied after the fact on a black roof. And then if you have the capacity, and structural capacity is really what matters, you can also put a green roof on over top of a less expensive, conventional flat roof membrane, and use something like a sedum, which is great because it sort of dies off in the heat of summer, and then it comes back, and it helps absorb rainwater. But there is a weight impact on that. One of the most important things you need to do is to be able to ventilate your attic. So make sure you have good attic ventilation that comes in through the soffit and out through the top, so that your attic is properly ventilated. And in terms of heat island and heat cameras, there's two quick things you can do. There's an app, there's a couple of apps, and they usually let you use it the first sort of 5 times for free, and then you have to pay something to use it. Or you can use it, but you can't take any pictures with it unless you pay for the app. So depending on what you want to do, there's some free options on most mobile phones and app stores that can get you a thermal camera. But also, if you wait for a day when it's cold, and we've had just a light dusting of snow, and you look at your roof, you can sometimes see all these sort of thin straight lines, and they tell you where your roof trusses are, and they show you how much heat loss is coming out through the roof, either because there's thin lines of snow and you're getting all the heat coming up between the trusses and melting, and what's left is thin lines of ice or frost on the roof. And so that can show you something as well, and give you an idea of the spacing of your roof trusses and the quality of your roof insulation.
Great. Yeah, that's great information. Again, we're going to try our best to capture as much of the detail, because I think people are interested in that detail. So we'll be going back, as well as providing this the video for people to have a look at it again themselves. Andy, are you there? How's your connection? I wanted to direct a few more sort of tree and canopy related questions your way, if I can. People have become a bit more nervous of big mature trees since the storm in May, which is interesting. I know I heard people saying, well, maybe it's time to get rid of those trees if they're going to cause us such a danger, which is a little bit worrisome. But what can people do to ensure that their mature trees are healthy and less danger of either limbs cracking off or coming down? Or do you have anything that homeowners, or anyone for that matter, community members who are thinking about trees around what we can do to keep the trees healthy?
Yeah, that was really going to be the major thrust of the presentation that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that these trees in the urban environment have to be maintained. It's not just a matter of sticking the tree in the ground and wiping the dirt off your hands and walk away. And certainly to remove big trees because they might become a hazard is really counterproductive. But it does mean that we have to be aware of the trees on our property and adjacent to our property on the city rights of way and so on, and look at the conditions of the trees that are there and be aware of the hazards that currently exist or may develop. And also looking at making a good relationship with a reputable tree care company, making sure that the people that you're hiring are at least certified arborists, making sure that you get references, as well, of course, check their insurance and WSIB credentials, and you know, whether you've got a plumber that does your work or an electrician that you call on regularly, the arborist should be also in that list of people that help you keep your property in good shape. But it all begins with being conscious of what's there, and on private property, but as well as public property. And Centretown and a few other community groups in the city are working with me on a project called Neighborwoods that teaches homeowners, residents to conduct inventories of the trees in the urban forest, and that's the whole urban forest, private and public, and translate that into stewardship plans at the community level. And again, to echo what Toon had said about the importance of working as a community, as a group, and recognizing that the resource is the resource in your private backyard is a resource for the community as well. So yeah, don't cut the tree down just because it might become a problem, because that isn't the answer.
Yeah, yeah. Are there trees? Are there
I'm sorry,
some?
it would also be against the bylaw, of course.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Although that doesn't necessarily always pose a fail-safe deterrent. Are there species that are more salt tolerant? Slightly different issue, but thinking about salt and things that are, you know, the urban environment can be a little tough on trees. So salt, there may be other, just in general, things that are in the air that are not great. Are there some trees in particular that are better for planting along roads and sidewalks, thinking about a more urban environment? And is there a resource that you would look, you know, that you might point us to get a better understanding of what those trees are as well?
Yeah, there are a few trees that are better adapted to it. Salt, I can't list them right off the top of my head, but the resources are there. Once again, probably just on the internet. I'm thinking of a document from the Urban Horticultural Institute. Sort of the name escapes me right now, but if you wanted, I could circulate that, a link to that document. It's available online, and it's got a number of important factors in terms of tree selection, in terms of salt tolerance and growth characteristics and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, if you can afford us any resources,
well.
Yeah, terrific.
But there's a lot of information available.
Yeah. I guess we're one of the things we're hoping is that by bringing you and others that we can help us. The internet's a very large universe of information. So if you can point us to your go-to resources to help us scramble up the learning curve, that'd be fantastic, and we'll make sure that those are circulated as well. Yeah, let me just see if there are any other sort of tree-specific questions.
Tone's got his hand up there, Carolyn.
Oh, sure. Tone, you want to jump in while I'm having a little troll here?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to echo that maintenance is key. I work with a number of landscape architects on a daily basis in the work we do, and many of them have commented to me about, you know, planting trees, and they do designs, whether it's for a private development and a street tree to be added, or they've done design work for parks for the city. And inevitably you get these comments that come back and say, you know, we don't have a budget for anything other than lawn mowing. So don't plant anything that needs any kind of maintenance. No flower beds, no gardens, no beds, no nothing, because we have no budget for maintenance, and they won't get one. So if there's anything that requires any kind of a bed that needs any kind of a maintenance of any kind, it's not going to happen. The budget for trees is really limited. It's very, very, very limited. And I've worked with one landscape architect who told me that he had planned some beautiful trees, planned a bunch of things, and the city decided, well, we're going to change the tree type and change the tree species, and they put a bunch of things in, and that's a tree that has a, I don't remember what it is, but it reaches a certain age and its limbs fall off once it reaches a certain size. So the city decided in their own good wisdom to swap out one tree for another because they thought it was prettier or cheaper, and it's a tree that's going to cause liability and injuries when these branches fall off and bonk people on the head. And it's because we're not thinking about this. We're not thinking about design. We're not thinking about how we plan things. The adage of planting a tree, the best time to plant a tree is yesterday and the second best time is today. We need to not just grab a tree and stick it on the ground and hope for the best, but we need to plan for something, design something, and then be able to maintain it. And then we need to commit to a life cycle of that maintenance. I've said this about 24 Sussex. 24 Sussex isn't a $30 million repair project. It's 30 years of deferred $1 million maintenance projects. And that's the problem we have with so much of our city infrastructure is, it's not hundreds of millions of dollars to fix the buyer market. It's years and years and years of neglect and underinvestment and under planning and under funding of maintenance of sewers and roads and parks and community centers and libraries. We have to think about how we're spending our money. And that means making some hard decisions about suburbs, about new infrastructure, about new places, so that we're taking care of the infrastructure we have. We have billions of dollars worth of buildings that are decaying around us, and we have to take care of them.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Those are, all really, they're big ideas, but obviously so important for all of us to think about at an individual level and community level, and what we can do to hopefully make some change. Just again, sort of trying to pick up on some of the questions that people had here. Let me see now. What about, are there is there any of our presenters that can speak to, or any in the community that can speak to incentives? Someone has said in some cities in Victoria, they believe there are incentives to property owners to establish water retention and more permeable surfaces. Would this be an idea that Ottawa should be considering, and what might that look like? Maybe Mary, I'll go to you, and perhaps not so much the incentives, although feel free to jump in on that one too. But what do you think the most like the in terms of water retention? I mean, you spoke to that obviously in your earlier comments, but the permeability issue as well. What, maybe you can just give that, elaborate. I'm sure there's a lot more to the slide that you gave us on that one.
Well, so there actually is a program, except it's in pilot form right now. It's called Rain Ready Ottawa, and it's dealing with it's not citywide yet. So hold the incentives off the table if you're not in one of the areas where it's currently being piloted. But there are excellent resources on the website that explain the various things that you can do. Things like downspout redirection, and downspout redirection can be so many different things. It could be as simple as turning your joint 90 degrees so that the water pours onto your lawn instead of your driveway. Or it can be, like we briefly talked about, rain gardens and infiltration pits and things like that. So there is a program that's building. It's just not Ottawa wide yet. It's in pilot form, and it's been, I think, 2 years. No, it's probably, well, I'm not sure. But it is fairly new, and we can expect it to expand more. So it does exist. It's happening.
Okay, and are there actually, through that program or through the pilot, as you mentioned, are there actually financial incentives or some financing involved for potentially for homeowners?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. And like I said, I don't believe the Glebe is part of it right now. There are three
Is that the rain barrel? Is that the rain barrel one, Mary?
Well, there's so you can get and again, if you're in the pilot area, oh yeah, Steve and Della have come up. Yes, up to $5,000. And so that can, and if you're looking to replace your driveway, if you've got an asphalt driveway and it's seeing the end of its lifeline, maybe you want to move to a permeable interlock. So that's an option. Things like downspout redirection, rain gardens. Check out the program. It's got a lot of ideas there. You might not necessarily be getting the incentives this year or next year, but it is a program that's underway, and yes.
Carolyn, we've got 2 minutes left.
Okay.
So get a short question in there.
Okay. You've mentioned a few times redirecting my downspout. I personally have been thinking about how we have a lot of water runoff off of our roof, and it lands in a bad place in our lawn, and it just floods everything and gets into seems to be getting into our foundation. So I heard you say about the downspout. That seems like an easy and obvious thing that I should have thought about. Just briefly, can you speak to any resources? You mentioned rain for capturing rainwater sort of off of people's roofs, and like rain capture at an individual level, individual property level. Are there good resources? I'm not asking you to go into a long explanation of how to build that in my side yard, but are there resources that you can point us to?
Yeah, you can check out Fusion Landscaping. You can check out I think it's Peel Region have a pretty good program that has been modeled in other places that goes through some of the details. But if you're looking up some of these things, I would just say try to make sure that they're particularly Ontario specific, or at least within our sort of geographical range, so that you know that we're dealing with similar conditions. But there's so many resources out there, different ways to deal with water on your property for sure.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think that's yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say I know that there were some questions that I didn't get to, I'm sure, and lots of great comments in there as well. But thank you everyone for doing this, and we will do our best to go back and review what we received and we didn't get to, and try and address those additional questions. So thank you.
Okay, so Darlene, you're on.
Thank you, Brenda. So it's my pleasure to, first of all, thank our panelists for all the time they've given us this evening, for the generously sharing their expertise in the presentation and the information that they've given us tonight, and also for answering your many questions. As Carolyn said, we didn't get to all of them. We will be culling the chat, and we'll be trying to compile questions and make sure that whatever is left answered does get answered. We will be posting the recording of this session on our respective websites. We'll also be making the presentations available. So I know there was a request for getting the copy of the presentation earlier this evening. So yes, that will be forthcoming. And we will undertake to do all of this within the next few weeks after we've had a chance to work on all of these things. We're hoping that this is just the first of an ongoing series of community discussions about climate resilience. And I hope that the ideas that you've heard tonight will make you look at things a little bit differently when you walk around your neighborhood. Based on what you've heard, are you seeing things you like, things you don't like? Are there things that you think should be done differently? And that's the kind of conversation we'd like to continue in our respective communities in the new year. Like how can we make our houses, our residences, our communities more climate resilient? And as the presenters have shown tonight, there are things that can be done. If you'd like to become involved, you can contact the Glebe Community Association, Environment Committee, and the Centretown Community Association Climate Change Working Group, and we'd be delighted to get your new ideas and your new energy and to take this forward. I'd like to give a shout out to the students at Carleton University, the community engagement course, because they did actually a lot of work behind the scenes to help us organize this event. And also my fellow organizers, Joan Freeman and Carolyn McKenzie from the Glebe Community Association, Brenda Knight, also with me at Centretown Community Association, and a lot of people behind the scenes at these associations who've made all of this possible. And finally, thank all of you for being here, for participating, for putting a lot of your ideas and thoughts in the chat. It's been wonderful. And with that, I will wish you all a good evening. And I hope that we get to see each other in a continued conversation on climate resiliency. Thanks very much.
Good.
I'm going to shut the recording off if that's okay.
Yeah, no, makes sense.
Yes.
Thanks, Laura.